It started with a moment so humiliating, so raw, that people standing nearby said they felt their stomachs turn. A young black man, dressed in sharp but casual business attire, walked into the central atrium of a luxury shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon. He wasn't loud, wasn't causing trouble. He was simply looking for a store he wanted to visit, phone in hand, scanning the map. And yet, within minutes, the mall's security chief, a white man in his 50s with a clipped mustache and a stiff posture, stormed over, his voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "You don't belong here," he barked, pointing at him like he was some kind of intruder. "Stores like these aren't for people like you. Move along." Imagine that. In 2025. A crowd of shoppers froze mid-step, some clutching their bags tighter, others whispering, while the young man stood stunned, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process what just happened. And then came the words that set the entire mall buzzing. "I said you're not welcome here. Leave before I have you escorted out." That moment, those 30 seconds of naked public racism, would set off a chain of events no one in that building could have predicted. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that mall suspected, was that this young man wasn't just a shopper. He was an undercover CEO, a self-made millionaire, and by the end of that very same day, he would own the building they were standing in. But before we get to that stunning twist, let's go back and understand how this story unfolded. Because the truth behind it is bigger than one mall, one man, or one arrogant racist encounter. It's about dignity. It's about how black men and women are still in plain daylight, treated as outsiders in spaces they built, invested in, and sustained. And it's about how one act of resilience can flip the script entirely. Now let's set the stage. The mall itself was a massive complex in a wealthy suburb, the kind of place where chandeliers hang above the escalators and the parking lot gleams with high-end cars. For many, it was more than just a shopping center. It was a symbol of status. And for our protagonist, Marcus Williams, it was also a test. Marcus was 34 years old, a first-generation entrepreneur from Atlanta who had built his wealth in tech and logistics. He had grown up watching his mother work 2 jobs, often facing dismissive looks when she entered spaces that didn't match what people thought a black family should afford. Those moments stayed with him, etched into his memory like scars. So when Marcus started expanding his investments, he was intentional about one thing: ownership. Owning the spaces where he and people like him had once been treated as though they didn't belong. And that's what brought him to this mall. Officially, he was there that day in plain clothes, quietly evaluating the property. The management company had no idea that the man walking past their boutiques was already deep in negotiations to acquire controlling interest. Marcus wanted to see how staff treated everyday shoppers, how tenants operated, and, though he would never admit it out loud, whether the ghosts of his childhood experiences would repeat themselves. He didn't expect the answer to hit so quickly, so harshly. The security chief, whose name would later become infamous in local news articles, Richard Holloway, had worked at the mall for over 20 years. He prided himself on maintaining order, but in practice, that often meant profiling. He had a history, whispered about but never formally challenged, of stopping black teens, questioning Latino families, and giving cold stares to anyone who didn't fit the look of his ideal clientele. And on that day, with Marcus standing near the glass fountain in the atrium, Richard decided to assert himself once again. "Sir, I asked you to leave," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Marcus, stunned but composed, responded quietly, "Excuse me? I'm just looking for a store." Richard scoffed, waved a dismissive hand, and muttered something that several bystanders swore sounded like, "You people always say that?" The crowd's silence was deafening. Some looked away. Others pulled out their phones, unsure if recording would escalate the situation. And Marcus, he stood still, shoulders squared, his heart pounding. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. Marcus had intentionally dressed in a neutral way. No flashy watch, no designer shoes, just a crisp shirt and slacks. He wanted to blend in, to feel what an average shopper might feel. And yet, blending in hadn't saved him from being singled out. That's the cruel truth about racism. It isn't about what you wear, how much money you make, or what titles you hold. It's about the assumptions people carry in their heads the moment they see the color of your skin. And Marcus, despite all his success, was being shoved back into the box society had always tried to put him in. Now, this is where the story starts pulling us deeper. Richard's voice rose as he gestured toward two younger guards nearby. "Escort him out!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the escalator whispered, "But he hasn't done anything." A teenage boy muttered, "This is messed up," while his mother tugged him away, not wanting to get involved. That's the bystander effect in real time. Some knew it was wrong, but fear, or indifference, kept them silent. Marcus, though, had a choice. He could leave quietly, as he had seen his mother do countless times when faced with similar humiliation, or he could stand his ground even if it meant drawing attention he hadn't planned for. He chose the latter. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on Richard. And that's when Richard smirked. That smug, arrogant smirk that said he believed the system was on his side. "Then you're trespassing," he sneered, "and I'll have you arrested. Pause right here." Can you feel the tension building? A black man, wrongly accused, standing in a mall surrounded by silent witnesses with a white authority figure threatening to call the police. How many times have we seen this play out? How many names, how many tragedies have started with those exact words? This wasn't just a shopping trip anymore. This was a test of character, of resilience, of dignity. And Marcus knew that if he bowed out now, the humiliation would not just belong to him. It would echo in every person of color who'd ever been told they don't belong. But here's where the story turns. Because while Richard thought he was dealing with just another shopper, Marcus already had leverage that would shake the ground beneath this mall. And in the hours to come, the balance of power would flip in a way Richard couldn't possibly imagine. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to Axiom USA for more powerful true stories. And as we dive deeper, ask yourself, if you had been standing there that day, watching a man face open racism in public, would you have spoken up, or would you have stayed silent like most of the crowd? That's the uncomfortable truth this story forces us to confront. Marcus stood his ground, his eyes locked on Richard, the security chief whose smug expression revealed years of unchecked arrogance. The crowd had thinned slightly, some people moving away to avoid being part of the confrontation, others staying, phones subtly raised, recording from a distance. A few even whispered, "He hasn't done anything," but no one moved to intervene. Richard's hand hovered near his walkie-talkie, the universal sign that he was seconds away from escalating this further. "You're trespassing now," Richard repeated, louder this time, as though announcing it to the entire atrium. The younger guards stepped closer, uncertainty flashing across their faces. They weren't as seasoned in this theater of intimidation as Richard was. And Marcus, calmly, firmly, responded with a line that would echo in that mall long after. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing." Richard laughed, a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Think carefully? Son, I've been running this mall longer than you've been alive. I know who belongs here. And you!" He gestured up and down Marcus's body. "Don't." That word, don't, it hung in the air like poison. You don't belong, you don't matter, you're not one of us. And in that moment, Marcus thought about his mother, how she'd once been turned away from a jewelry store when she'd saved for months to buy a gift. He thought about his younger brother pulled over by police for driving too nice a car in the wrong neighborhood. He thought about every moment when black dignity was tested, bruised, humiliated. And he decided not today. The tension thickened as Richard finally called it in. His crackling voice on the walkie-talkie, "Need assistance in the atrium. Possible trespasser refusing to leave." Marcus took a breath, pulled out his phone, and started recording. "This is what discrimination looks like," he said clearly. A ripple went through the crowd. Some people raised their eyebrows because naming it out loud has power. And yet, Richard doubled down. "Don't play the victim card with me," he sneered. "I know your type." The arrogance was stunning, but also revealing. Because that phrase, "your type," was the slip, the mask off, the words that confirmed what everyone suspected. This wasn't about rules. It was about race. Minutes later, two police officers arrived, their radios buzzing, their hands resting on holsters as they walked briskly toward the scene. The mall fell even quieter. Now it wasn't just security, it was law enforcement. Richard wasted no time. He pointed at Marcus like he was pointing out a shoplifter. "This man is trespassing, refuses to leave." Marcus raised his phone higher. "I'm standing in a public space, not causing trouble, and being targeted for the color of my skin." One officer glanced at the other. You could almost see the hesitation. Because in 2025, every cop knows cameras are everywhere. Every word, every move might end up viral. Still, the power dynamic was clear. Marcus was outnumbered. The threat of handcuffs loomed heavy in the air. Because while Richard was gloating, certain he had cornered Marcus, Marcus knew something Richard didn't: the purchase paperwork. In his bag, tucked neatly in a folder, were the preliminary acquisition contracts showing that Marcus was already in final negotiations to buy controlling ownership of this very mall. He had walked in that day not just as a customer, but as a future owner conducting an undercover observation. And now, the mall's soon-to-be landlord was being threatened with arrest for the crime of existing while black. But Marcus didn't reveal his hand. Not yet. He let the tension play. He let Richard dig deeper, let the crowd's unease grow, because he knew timing was everything. Instead, he calmly said to the officers, "I'd like you to call the mall's general manager, right now." Richard scoffed. He doesn't need the manager. He needs to leave. But Marcus didn't back down. "If I'm trespassing, the manager can confirm that. Let's hear what he has to say." The officers hesitated. Then one reluctantly radioed for the general manager to come to the atrium. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a navy suit rushed in, his ID badge swinging from a lanyard. His name was David, the general manager of the mall. He looked flustered, clearly pulled from a meeting. "What's going on here?" Richard jumped in first, eager to frame the story. "This man refuses to leave. He's harassing customers." David looked at Marcus, then at the small circle of bystanders who now clearly looked unconvinced. Marcus, still recording, spoke evenly. "I walked in here to shop. I've been stopped, harassed, and now threatened with arrest because of how I look. Do you stand by that?" David blinked, clearly uncomfortable. The eyes of the crowd, the phones recording, it was pressure he hadn't expected. He stammered. "Well, if you're here to shop, of course you're welcome, sir." "That's not a problem." Richard's jaw dropped. "What, are you serious? Look at him!" But David cut him off, his voice firmer now. "Enough! We can't treat customers this way." And for the first time, the smug confidence drained from Richard's face. He looked around, realizing the crowd was no longer with him. But Marcus wasn't finished. He lowered his phone slightly, took out the folder from his bag, and held it up. "Since we're talking about who belongs here, let's make this clear. By next week, I'll be the new owner of this mall." The atrium went dead silent. David's face went pale. Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. A murmur swept through the onlookers. Marcus flipped the folder open just enough for the bold letters of the acquisition paperwork to show. "So when you told me I don't belong, what you really meant is that the man who's about to sign your paychecks doesn't belong." The irony was nuclear. The arrogance of Richard's words shattered instantly. Some people gasped audibly. A woman whispered, "No way." And Marcus, calm as ever, closed the folder and added, "Justice has a funny way of showing up at the right time." Because instead of apologizing, instead of backtracking, Richard doubled down again. "This is a joke. You expect me to believe someone like you could buy this place?" That sentence, "and someone like you," was his downfall. The crowd audibly groaned. Phones kept recording, and within hours, that clip would be all over social media. A white security chief sneering at a black CEO, captured in high-definition irony. The police officers, now visibly uncomfortable, quietly stepped back. They weren't putting Marcus in cuffs, not with paperwork in his hand and half the mall filming. David, the manager, muttered something about needing to discuss privately and urged Richard to step aside. But the damage was done. The moment was sealed. And Marcus, instead of storming off, chose dignity. He looked Richard in the eye and said, "You wanted me out of here, but here's the truth. I'll be signing the deed that ensures you never set foot here again." The video went viral, hitting millions of views within 48 hours. News outlets picked it up. Black CEO confronted by mall security. Turns out he's the new owner. Social media debates raged. Some commenters expressed outrage. Others claimed Richard was just doing his job. But the visuals were undeniable. The sneer, the words, the arrogance, and the truth behind it all. Behind the scenes, Marcus finalized the purchase. Lawyers moved fast. Within 2 weeks, the deal closed, and the mall legally became his property. His first order of business? Terminating Richard Holloway. And in a move dripping with poetic justice, Marcus called a staff-wide meeting in the same atrium where he'd been humiliated. Employees gathered, whispers flying. Richard stood stiffly off to the side, arms crossed, still convinced this was all some elaborate trick. Marcus stepped to the microphone, looked around at the staff and said, "I was told I don't belong here, but as of today, this space belongs to all of us. And it will never again be a place where anyone is judged by the color of their skin." Then he turned to Richard and with steady calm announced, "Your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out." The irony, security escorting the security chief, was not lost on anyone. The staff clapped. Some cheered. A few even cried. And Richard, red-faced, tried to protest, sputtering about rules and order, but it was useless. He was led out, past the same fountain where he had tried to humiliate Marcus, past employees who now looked at him not with fear, but with disdain. And that right there was the climax, the power flip, the justice moment, the reversal of roles. But Marcus didn't stop there. Over the next months, he implemented changes that went beyond symbolism. He set up community days at the mall, giving small Black-owned businesses free pop-up space to showcase their products. He retrained the security staff on anti-bias practices, making sure no one else endured what he had. And he spoke publicly about what happened, not to boast, but to spark a conversation. Racism thrives in silence. The only way to defeat it is to confront it, document it, and change the system that allows it. If this story has you hooked, hit like and share it to support Axiom USA. A man was told he didn't belong in a place he was already negotiating to own. He was threatened with arrest in a building where, weeks later, his signature would hang in the manager's office. That's more than just irony. That's poetic justice. And it forces us all to ask, how many other Marcuses are out there, walking through spaces they already sustain, still being told they don't belong? The story's resolution wasn't just the firing of Richard. It was the ripple effect. People who witnessed that moment said it changed them. One bystander, the teenage boy who had muttered, "This is messed up," later said he recorded the whole thing and posted it. His video was the one that first went viral. He wrote in his caption, "I saw racism today. I also saw justice. That teenager said it made him realize silence is complicity." That's the moral heartbeat of this story. And Marcus himself? He went on to say in interviews that he never planned to go viral. "I wasn't there to make a point. I was there to see how things worked. But when racism stared me in the face, I decided not to shrink." That decision, to stand, to record, to reveal at the right moment, changed everything. Want to hear more untold stories of injustice and resilience? Subscribe to Axiom USA and never miss one. So here we are. A story that began with humiliation ended with triumph. A man told he didn't belong became the very owner of the space. The antagonist who believed he had unchecked power was escorted out in disgrace. And a community that once stayed silent began talking. That's the arc. That's the lesson. That's the irony of injustice. When exposed, it often creates the very change it tried to suppress. And for you, the viewer, the takeaway is this. Racism is not just about moments of hate. It's about systems that allow arrogance, profiling, and silence to thrive. But every so often, a story like this reminds us justice can turn the tables. And resilience, dignity, and timing can rewrite the ending. Thanks for watching Axiom USA, where every story reminds us of resilience and truth. Like, share, and subscribe for more.